Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the thesis defense of Yanniel Rivas Andújar, who has translated a chapter from El Derecho a lo Común, Bienes Comunes, Propiedad y Justicia Climática by Érika Fontánez Torres. I wish to express my gratitude to the members of this committee, in particular, Professors Aurora Lauzardo Ugarte and Jane Ramírez, for taking the time to read and comment on Janiel's work. Janiel will begin this session with a presentation, and then we will follow with a discussion of his project. Okay, so Janiel, you can start now.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Yanniel A. Rivas Andújar, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my translation of El Derecho a lo Común, Bienes Comunes, Propiedad y Justicia Climática. First, I would like to talk about the book's author, Érika Fontánez Torres. She is a professor at the University of Puerto Rico School of Law. She teaches civil property law, general theory of law, political theory courses. She is a scholar at Princeton and the University of Michigan. She has been recognized by the Puerto Rico Bar Association and the Puerto Rico Planning Society. She is also an accomplished author of legal texts, and she is committed to the protection of our natural resources. Okay, so for the translation of the book's title, as you saw earlier on, it doesn't really go into the details of what property is. It just says propiedad. So I decided for my translation that I wanted to make the distinction between what's private and what's public property. And that is why, instead of just translating it as the right to the commons, um, common property, property, and climate justice, I decided to make the distinction between what's private and what's public for the audience to understand the difference between the two of them. Okay, so this is an overview of Chapter 4, also called the Coastal Zone and the Maritime Terrestrial Property. This chapter deals with a very current and serious problem, which is the appropriation of public property, also referred to as common property by public interests. It is focused on the coast and the maritime terrestrial public domain property, maritime and coastal gentrification, the damage to natural resources such as mangroves and wetlands, and deprivation of residents of the right to access coastal areas. Here we have the case of Piñones Loíza. Piñones Loíza is um, is full of complex natural zones such as mangroves, forests, beaches, channels, marshes, reefs, wetlands, lagoons, and areas of high ecological value. And its residents have been facing the risk of displacements for decades. In 2007, after the legal disputes including the purchase of what is the Monte Grande sector, Governor Acevedo Vilá bought the sector, what ended up being the Costa Serena project, even though the community argued that the area might include what is maritime terrestrial public domain property. This is the case of PFC Properties, Inc. versus the Department of Natural Resources. These are some agencies that are related to the coast and the maritime terrestrial zone. The Department of Natural and Environmental and Natural Resources is the agency responsible for managing, protecting, and conserving the environment and its natural resources. These are the list of other agencies that are also included in the protection of the environmental and natural resources. The Puerto Rico Planning Board, the Permit Management Office, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The Maritime Terrestrial Zone and its coastal waters. These include the coastline and inlets, beaches, land reclaimed from the sea, including the accessions and siltings, salt marshes, coastal pools, marshes, estuaries, lowlands bathed by the ebb and flow of the tides, and submerged lands. So the maritime terrestrial zone, is it common or is it public property? Common property is defined by things that by nature or natural law cannot be owned by individuals. These include the air, the sea, and the shores. Public property, property that is patrimonial, but the state decides to allocate it for use by society, and it may return to its patrimonial domain. This could include the roads, any government or public cemeteries, and etc. And although the maritime terrestrial zone is technically classified as public property, its classification conforms to Article 241 of the Civil Code concerning common property. So in this case, we can say that the maritime terrestrial zone is both common and public property at the same time. The coastal zone. The coastal zone is defined as a planning area that includes the strip of land along the shore of the ocean and adjacent waters extending inland up to 1,000 meters from the coastline and such additional distances necessary to assure the inclusion of key natural coastal systems. The coastal maritime zone and natural resources protection laws and regulations. Article 6, Section 9 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the Spanish Water Act of 1866, the Spanish Ports Act of 1886, the Dock and Harbor Act of 1968, the Coastal Zone Management Act of 1972, the Organic Act of the Department of Natural and Environmental Resources of 1974, the Puerto Rico Coastal Management Plan of 1978, Regulation 4860 of the Department of Environmental Resources of 1992 as amended, Climate Change Mitigation, Adaptation, and Resilience Act of 2019, the Civil Code of Puerto Rico 2020, President Joe Biden's Executive Order of January 27th, 2021, and federal climate change legislation. Land reclaimed from the sea, the case of San Jerónimo Development versus ELA. San Jerónimo Development claims ownership of submerged lands reclaimed from the sea that were filled prior to 1968 that are located at the Paseo Caribe project. The government responded that the area was part of the maritime terrestrial zone and it was not subject to appropriation. The Supreme Court ruled that the submerged lands belonged to San Jerónimo Development and it adjudicated the expropriated reclaimed land to the private party. The filling of the submerged lands occurred before Article 6, Section 19 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the creation of the Department of Natural and Environmental Resources, and the adoption of the Puerto Rico Docks and Ports Act and the Regulation 4860. It is because of this that we can speculate that this could have been changed and this could have altered the Supreme Court's decision. The survey. In civil patrimonial law, the survey is the action that private owners can take to set boundaries of a property when they are uncertain of the plot size. It is carried out by the Department of Natural and Environmental Resources in cases where disputes regarding the maritime terrestrial public domain property are involved. The limitation is what will determine what is common property and adjacent property and patrimonial property. A survey carried out by the Department of Natural and Environmental Resources is valid for up to 5 years. Bono Correa versus Vélez Arrocho is a case in which Bono Correa requested a survey of 3 different properties. The Department of Natural and Environmental Resources determined that those properties were in fact in the maritime terrestrial zone. The dedication and the revocation of dedication, 2 terms. These are mechanisms established in Article 244 of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico Civil Code. A dedication is when private property is dedicated to public use, and the revocation of a dedication is when private property ceases to be classified as public and it regains its original condition as soon as the public purpose ceases. Legal easements. Adjacent lands to the maritime terrestrial zone are regulated by legal easements. These types of easements include electricity, water supply system, sanitation, storm sewers, salvage, coastal surveillance, vehicular traffic, pedestrian access, and river and gullies. Climate change and its effect on the rising sea levels. The Climate Change Mitigation, Adaptation, and Resilience Act, Act number 33 of 2019. It establishes public policy regarding climate change and the effects on the coast. It implements coastal planning that addresses sea level rise and directs new developments away from the coast. And the Department of Natural and Environmental Resources is responsible for directing the public policy in Act number 33. The relevance of Chapter 4. This chapter exposes a serious problem regarding the appropriation of public property by private interests. Some examples of recent invasions and seizures of private property, public property include the filling of wetlands in Hobos Bay, Salinas, Puerto Rico, the filling of wetlands in Las Marias community, Salinas, Puerto Rico, the construction of a private pool in Los Almendros Beach, Rincón, Puerto Rico, Esencia, an urban development mega project located in Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico, and the structures that have been placed at La Paguera Natural Reserve in Lajas, Puerto Rico. Translation challenges. Legal terminology. The translation of legal text is a specialized and complex field that requires extensive research of source and target languages and the intricacies of legal concepts. It contains references to statutes, regulations, and court decisions that are unknown to the translator. I decided to include a glossary of some key legal terms that I thought that were the most important and the audience should know. Some of these entries include the word adoptar, translated as promulgate, the term afectación, translated as dedication, desafectación, translated as the revocation of the dedication, bienes as property, bienes comunes as common property, bienes de dominio público as public property, cosificación as a commodification, and inmueble or bien inmueble as real property. Some of the strategies that I used while translating were the consultation of bilingual legal dictionaries, the examinations of statutes and regulations, the perusal of court decisions mentioned in the text, and the reading of journal articles mentioned in the text. Cultural context. These are examples of cultural terms that were not translated and were left as is with explanations. The first one being the term cuerda. It was preserved in the translation, and a conversion to acres was provided in parentheses throughout the translation. And the term matero was also preserved in the translation, and I left a translator's note explaining the meaning behind the term in an already existing footnote. Poetry translation. At the beginning of chapter 4, there is a slight excerpt of the poem by Luis Pales Matos titled Canción de Mar. There is also an official translation by author Julio Marzan. I made some slight changes to the official translation. These changes include the addition of the word dressed on the second line, where it reads, the sea in blue overalls, was changed to the sea dressed in blue overalls, and the term shores was replaced with coasts to align with the contents in chapter 4. The example reads, its outstretched arms pushing the shores versus its outstretched arms pushing the coasts. Here we can see an example of the original poem by Luis Pales Matos, Julio Marzan's version of his translation, and the translation that I ended up deciding to go with. Proverb analysis. El mar reclama lo suyo as the sea claims its own. It appears at the very beginning of chapter 4, below the poem Canción de Mar. It cannot be traced to a particular author or a source, and I believe that Fontánez includes this proverb because it refers to the sea's capacity to reclaim what it has lost or what it rightfully owns. Both the poem and the proverb attribute a human-like quality to the sea. Lack of official documents. There are no official English translations of some of the laws by the Office of Legislative Services. There are also no official English translations by the Bureau of Translations of the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico for cases quoted in the translations. Conclusion. Translating this chapter will provide crucial information for enabling English-speaking readers to grasp the complexities of ongoing disputes over the privatization of coastal and maritime property. It also plays a key role in raising awareness, encouraging broader public engagement in the struggle to protect our shared patrimony, and urging the government to take action to safeguard our natural resources. Thank you, and I would like to end the presentation with a quote by Sylvia Earle that reads, "Even if you never have the chance to see or touch the ocean touches you with every breath you take, every drop of water you drink, and every bite you consume. Everyone, everywhere is inextricably connected to and utterly dependent upon the existence of the sea."
Okay, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Janiel, for an informative synopsis of the work that you did in this thesis project. I'd like to now hand over the floor to our readers who have questions and comments and maybe some revisions to the work that you've done. I don't know who would like to go first.
Janie, if you want to start, you're the guest.
Jane, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was just thinking about that and then got distracted. Okay, Yanniel, it's good to see you. It's been quite a while, and I was very, very happy to be asked to be on this one because I figured this was going to be one where I would not have to work as hard as I do with some others because I trusted that you would do an excellent translation, and you did. So I'm very happy with the work you've done. You've done excellent research. Your preface is full of references, and that shows that you are diligent about keeping track of where you found the information you need. The choices that you made have all been documented, and that was delightful to read. Your academic register is quite good, to the point that there are a couple of things that I was going to let go because of a few expressions were commonly used, but it just came kind of a surprise to me when you I don't think I made a note of what they actually were, but when you said something a little less formal, because your register had been so formal up to that point, that it kind of surprised me. I did mark those, And you can change them or not as you wish, because it's you speaking in the preface, so you have the right to do that. But you have a good grasp of the formal register that's required for academic translation. So that's very good. That made me happy. You need a little work in a few places on syntax, which I've marked. A few sentences that when you have a long list when you have a long series of items in a sentence, and some of them are complex, have parentheses in there or dashes or internal commas in an item, then you need to separate all of those items with semicolons rather than commas, so that we can keep track of which phrases define which ones. And I've marked those. So I couldn't find much in the way of flaws in the translation. I marked a few phrases here and there that I thought maybe we don't exactly use. I'm going to ask my colleagues, because this is one that had me puzzled. Once when you quoted someone, you said pursuant to someone, I can't remember. I've never heard pursuant to used in a quotation. I mean, I've heard pursuant to used pursuant to the committee's decision, or pursuant to common law, pursuant to some set of rules. We made this decision that we would enforce the rules in a different way, whatever. I haven't heard it usually as just an according to someone speaking. Is this am I wrong? I mean, because I didn't say it was wrong. I just was a little surprised by it, and the dictionary didn't help me much.
Well, yeah. It's synonymous as to whether
It
it's
is.
used. The only thing it might have been me actually doing that, because, and it might have been also not to repeat certain language. If you have too many according tos, you want to change the language.
Yeah.
I guess there are other ways it could have been stated, but the thing is that pursuant to technically means exactly the same thing as according to.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I found
So,
that was why
pursuant means following,
following.
it means it's synonymous. So, and I'm sure if you looked on the Ngram viewer, you'd find it.
Well, you'll find it. Yes, I would have to look at all of the hits listed below, because Ngram viewer, of course, the phrases there. The phrases, I'm quite familiar with the phrase pursuant to. It just struck me as an unusual usage of it to be introducing a quotation. So never mind that. Yanniel, when you get to that point, it's been defended already, so don't worry about it. Aurora, you had any comment there?
On pursuant?
I'm using it with a because I know it. One of the definitions in the dictionary was according to, and yet it's just I've never heard it. I don't recall ever having heard it used in that way. Okay, so anyway, that's the fact that I have to dig that deep to find something to criticize shows that we're doing very well. I do want to say one thing. In fact, almost all of what I have that I want to bring up as issues that I'd like for us to talk about are from the preface. But there's one from the very beginning of your translation that I do want to bring up. And you just mentioned it in your presentation, which is the translation of the poem. I agree with the changes. I think your changes improved the translation of the poem. However, tell me if I'm wrong, but I did not see in the actual translation anything that mentioned that you changed that translation. Your footnote merely said translated by and gave the man's name. You can't do that. If you say, if you list a poem that he has translated, you have to do it exactly as he translated. The published if you're going to use a published version, you have to use it exactly as it is. I think it's possible for you to get by with making those changes if you acknowledge it in a footnote. But you can't get by with just making those changes because you want to and still credit it to that translator.
Yeah, and
so
I just have a question in that regard. Yanniel, you mentioned it in your presentation, but is it in the preface? I mean, I don't remember.
I don't think that change about. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Yanniel. You asked Yanniel, not me. Sorry.
I'm looking for it real quick, but there's a section dedicated to the poem. Look for it quickly.
You talk about the coasts, your reasoning with coasts, and I agree with it. I don't remember your mentioning in the preface the dressed part.
Yeah, I have that in the presentation, but not in the preface.
Oh, okay. Hey, yeah.
Well, we're fortunate.
Add it to the preface, you know, that little bit of information, and then also in the footnote.
But he does say
I
that
would mention with revisions by.
That would do that. Because we have the privilege of seeing your preface and your translation and the source text and your presentation. Nobody else is going to have that privilege.
Yeah.
So even though I don't know who could be seeing your translation, still the translation needs to include not necessarily the reasons for your making those changes, but the fact that you did does have to be there. So okay. The other things I wanted to, and these are also, one of these is in something I've brought up in the past. In your preface, even as early as the acknowledgments, if anybody wants to look at it, I don't think you need to look at it because you'll know what I'm talking about. It's on Roman numeral 4, page Roman numeral 4, which is the acknowledgments. You mentioned PGT, and you you mentioned the programa grado, I don't know whether you said it in English or Spanish, actually. No, you said it in English. The graduate program in translation, PGT by its Spanish abbreviation. Now, I don't like that phrase, and I've been asking for a long time for our faculty to stop teaching it if we are teaching it. It's a literal, well, it's a calque of the Spanish por sus siglas in inglés that we see all the time. But there's a couple of problems with it. One, that is PGT is not an abbreviation. And it's not even an acronym. It's an initialism, sorry. And who knows those, only people like us, only word nerds know the difference.
An initialism is a form of abbreviation.
Okay. Well, I'll stand corrected on that one. But I don't see, the other is just that I don't see the need for it. And,
well,
and
you
the
could
phrase,
also, I'm sorry.
the phrase seems awkward to me by its Spanish abbreviation. And I think I don't see why we couldn't simply leave it as PGT in parentheses, and people are going to understand. People are going to know that it's a Spanish-speaking country, it's Spanish-speaking organization, and if the initials don't match, that's because it's Spanish words. If you feel the need for it, you could just put PGT, comma, in Spanish
In Spanish.
rather than that slightly awkward calc that I see. I mean, you didn't invent it. I'm sure you've seen it everywhere too. So that's why you used it. But I don't have any problem with por sus siglas in English when I see it in Spanish because it seems to flow to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see the need for that. And on that same page, if anybody happens to be there, a couple of times, and I wrote a comment asking, is there a reason why you did this? And I decided, no, I'm sure it was just a mistake, but sometimes you leave out the accent on Érika.
Yeah, I mentioned that, Yanniel, in my revised copy, and it's very easy, just do a find and replace for every Érika and replace it with Érika with an accent on it.
Yeah, and there aren't even very many. That's why I decided that
but there are a few.
wasn't.
There are a few.
I found two. I noticed two.
Hmm.
So and I marked them. I wondered if briefly if it was some personal preference of hers or something, but then no, every place I saw her name, I saw it with the accent. So I was sure that it was not intentional. The one other thing I want to talk about is, and this is something that has bothered me all the time that I've been teaching. I was taught, I'm going to say it was by the late Professor Carmen Diaz, I'm not 100% sure. I was taught that to refer to a certain dictionary as DRAE, D-R-A-E, the Diccionario de la Real Academia Española. I hear my students saying RAE, and that is what you wrote. But that's not the title of a dictionary. That's the name of the organization that creates the dictionary. So this is Roman numeral 12, where you mentioned a couple of the sources that you used for legal translation. You mentioned Black's Law Dictionary, which needs to be in italics because it's a book. Book titles go in italics. And I don't know whether that's a confusion with the fact that you're using italics for titles in Spanish, but you have to put Black's Law Dictionary in italics. But then the second one that you list is RAE, is real, as if that were the title. No, you have to find the title of that dictionary. And I looked it up, and it's not Diccionario de la Real Academia Española either. I looked it up, and I don't know I've had trouble finding access to the document. I'm not used to Zoom either, so it gives me problems. But I looked on their website and looked for obras, and they list the dictionaries that they publish, including, to my surprise, a pan-Hispanic dictionary of legal terms, which I didn't know they had because I don't do that sort of translation. But also it gives their name for their dictionary, and that's what you need to use. I think it's Diccionario de la Lengua Española. Okay, yes. That's the title you need to be putting there. And also, I did not find that dictionary, even though you do cite it, you do quote it, I didn't find the dictionary in your bibliography. And it should be there. You put Maria Orellanas, but not this one, so. But that's really all I have to say. The other problems are minor ones. I found a lot of stray commas in your footnotes. I don't know why that is. And I marked those. Word does not allow me to do a marginal comment on a footnote. So those footnotes, the comments about the footnotes are always on the last line of the page above. But
You can, what you can do, if you can make the comment over the number of the footnote in the text itself.
I could do that, but I could do that. Sure. I do, but I do highlight in the footnote whatever problem I found. But all of that was minor. Those few things need to be cleaned up, and I've marked them, and I will send you my comments so that you can correct them. But I commend you on an outstanding job. Very well done. I'll turn it over to Aurora.
Thank you. Yanniel, I also commend you for this excellent translation. And I want to, well, I agree with Jane's suggestions, which are pretty much the ones I found. It was difficult to find major errors or major problems, both in your preface and in your translation. And I do agree that you mastered, for the most part, the register, right? The tone of this academic work. And it is very important when we're translating academic text of this nature that we elevate also our discourse to the subject, to the topic. So I want to, since I have not many other things to point out, I do agree with Jane in the situation with the poem that that yes, you could say my translation or the translation, Yanniel, based on this other person's translation, or maybe you have to say that because you will not say translated by fulano de tal and then it not being it, but then you can add a little translator's note in that same footnote and say the poem was briefly adapted for the purposes of this, of the contents of this chapter, or whatever you want to add, so that it is very clear that you just make two little adaptations, but that this is someone else's translation that inspired you to make those little changes. Okay, so that is one. I like very much, and I do agree with Jane, whatever reference or whatever text you're referencing in your preface has to appear in the bibliography, which you did very, very well. I think that was the only one, the one that Jane mentioned that is not there. And I do remember we talked about it before the defense. And I think you did very well in that sense. I like very much, very, very much that you created a glossary. And here is why I like it so much. And this is something that I have been explaining to my students and asking them to do in their prefaces in the final assignment in all the courses. What I like about your preface is that it is not litany of pain. And that I appreciate very much. You documented, this is the situation, there are no translated texts, or there's this and that, or the terms, or even the cultural terms. You explain the situation and you provided your solution as your process, okay? Which is, to me, more elevated than, oh, I struggled looking for the meaning of this word. Okay, I don't, and I, you know, at times, sometimes some prefaces sound like the Passion of the Christ, you know, and they are suffering. And I say, well, you know, not knowing the meaning of a word is your problem. It's not a translation problem. Having to consult a specialized dictionary or a specialized glossary, it's not painful. You just have to do it, you know, so that is what I really like, and I would like everyone who's watching this defense to project yourselves as professionals, if you are working with a copy editor, the copy editor doesn't need to know what, is not interested the least in the time you spend looking for a word. That is your problem. But if you say, this is my decision, this is my translation of this word or this term or this phrase or this poem or this proverb, and this is how I how I reach that decision, that to me is you portraying yourself as a professional, okay? And you're already a professional, and you're going to be officially a professional once we finish this defense, okay? So I like very much the way that you projected yourself. You documented more a process than a torture or than suffering. And that I appreciate very much. I really do hope that all the students that are seeing this start presenting themselves as proper translators who are capable of identifying sources, choosing the right source, and present it and defend it, okay? And I really commend you for that. I love the tone and the way you projected yourself in the preface. And of course, the terms, the cultural terms that don't, like cuerdas, you took the right, you made the right decision. You left the word, and you also left the word materos. And I like that you did that because it is a way of preserving the culture of the source text. It's not, I'm going to make it so easy and smooth for the reader. You're providing the measurements anyway, so you're not giving them a hard time. But you're preserving those terms in Spanish. It's something that I like to do very much, and which is constantly done in gastronomic translation. You keep the name of the ingredients, and that is a way of keeping them alive and forcing other people to use them and recognize them. So I am very glad that you kept those two terms, and your decision, I couldn't agree more with what you did. Okay, the final, not the final, but unlike legal and sorry, the lack of official documents, I think that you solved it in a proper way, and maybe in the footnotes in the text, maybe in the first time that you provide the translation of excerpts or words from the Supreme Court decision, just put, unless otherwise specified, translations, the translations from the Supreme Court decisions are mine or are Yanniel. Okay, so that way, I like to see when the translator does it or when it's an official text. And if I only see decisions of the Supreme Court in the footnote, I might presume that it is an official English translation, okay? So just a little note inside the first note. As we talked about this, we translators should not, unless it is impossible to avoid, should not be adding notes and changing the numbering of the notes in an academic text, okay? So you take whatever footnote you can insert a little translator's note, and that to me is much better than adding notes, okay? So just because you do explain it in the preface, but again, as Jane was mentioning, if this book or this chapter is published, the reader is not going to have access to your preface. So it would be better if you, in your footnotes, you don't leave any margin of doubt about where this translation comes from, okay?
Yes.
Excuse me, may I add something?
Sure, absolutely.
Because this is, it fits right with what you're saying, and I had meant to say this. The opposite of that also is true. PGT does publish your preface, and I did mark in a couple of places in the preface, when you mention particular problems, it would be nice if you gave us a few examples.
Mm-hmm.
Because of course, when we get to your translation, we can see those examples.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But I mentioned it, I think, particularly when you mentioned the not so much the errors, like getting what name was it, Zimmerman or something, but not so much with getting the errors in the source text, but the additional information that you needed to find. That would be something I would have liked to have read 2 or 3 paragraphs of more examples of that, because that's the one part that will be publicly available, which is your preface.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yes, I just have a comment to make on that note. Aurora and I may disagree.
Totally. But I adore you, you know that.
Yeah, we may disagree on a certain matter that I'm going to just bring up right now, since Jane also brought it up, and the role of trans-editing. Now, Jane, you might not have seen or looked at that particular section that you just mentioned in the revised version of Yanniel's thesis, because what he did was he really truncated it, and he took out a bunch of information there, and that was on Aurora's suggestion. However, let me, and you know, I had a discussion with Yanniel about this, and Eugenio Santiago from the Jardín Botánico, and from, you know, who teaches botany at UPR, had done a translation of a French text from Quebec, of it's called Images Floristiques de Puerto Rico, and it's a botanist who visited Puerto Rico and made all of these notes about what he saw, you know, and actually identifying different plants and so on. And what Eugenio Santiago did with his other translators and editors was that they compiled 4 pages of tables where they specify every single error that was made by the author in the text from a scientific standpoint, and what the correct version should be. So, and I think that he went to an extreme, and I also think that this is very unusual, you know, and it's part of the introduction, you know, so it doesn't really bother the text itself so much. But I think that's an extreme. What I suggested to Yanniel was that, you know, yeah, of course, it's only natural that a translator would correct typos, would correct, you know, that kind of information. However, if any information had to be found because it was not there and inserted, I think that that needs to be there as part of the documentation. So,
Yes.
Yanniel, I think you removed that. I think it needs to go back in. Yanniel?
Yes.
You got that?
Well,
You didn't react very much.
May I disagree with you lovingly and respectfully? Yes, the example that you gave about Eugenio's, there is, to me, those are, let's say, botanical errors, scientific errors, you know, these are major errors. What I always send my authors or my editors a list of the things that I noticed that were wrong, or that I had to, hey, you put Pope 22 instead of Pope 23. This is one little thing that I just found in a book that I'm translating, the number of the Pope. Very apropos. And so that is different, but but to include typos or other things and make a list of that. And more importantly, and this is, at least this is what I teach my students, and I know that we may or not may disagree with making it official. To me, those are things that you tell your author, unless, as you said, David, if there's something that you had to add, or if there's, I mean, if it's something that is going to change the meaning of the translated text, or it's information that is lacking, then of course I would include it, because that is your contribution. And I do. I mean, we do trans-editing. It's part of our job. It's part of our everyday job. Anyone who's working on a translation is doing trans-editing, okay? Because you're not going to reproduce the error in your translation to begin with. So in that sense, that is what I meant. And I said, do keep the part, the explanation of your work as a trans editor. I mean, I think that should be documented. You do it because it's part of the job, okay? And again, this is part of presenting you, the way you present yourself. I do this because this is what needs to be done. What I do not agree is on a list of little mistakes or little errors.
No.
That are, to me, that is counterproductive, and
it's offensive.
No interesa a nadie. O sea, I would tell the author, listen, if you're going to make a second edition of your text, make sure that you check this, and it's done with respect and with perceivable good intention. We are not here to evaluate our writers or authors. Okay? So in that sense, specifically that. Yes, I would put that in the text, but not write as part of translation problems all these errors that I found in the text, because that's it's like
and I was not,
and I had breakfast this day. Yes, that's how we do every day. So
and I was not asking for examples of typos.
No,
but more because another point is, the most likely person after us to read your preface is a current student who's going to be defending their thesis soon, or is beginning their thesis process, and your explanation of that part of your job with examples will be very helpful to others who may want to translate academic texts to understand, hey, that's something I've got to do. So.
And yes, and and way before many of us were talking about this and teaching this, David was working with trans editing, and I think that including that in the process that you describe in the preface is important. It's important that we and our students talk about this and see ourselves doing it. So in that sense, I do like very much that you devoted a section to that, to explaining that, because if we repeat it and if we hear it, we do it eventually, naturally, right? And in that sense, I do like very much, and we talked about this.
Yes.
There was like a conversation between David and Yanniel and David and I about some things. And I said, absolutely, you have to mention that you do trans editing. You have to. And students have to be aware, because as Jane said, once you defend your thesis, your preface becomes a model for students that are working on their thesis now. So as much as you describe process, as much as you describe all the elements that comprise the translation process, you are also teaching, you're leaving something for the students that come after you to follow. Okay, so yes. So David, we don't disagree completely.
No. I probably misunderstood. Yeah, no, I agree with, and also, you know, I gave Yanniel suggestions for how to you know, deal with that section, and I think he did a fine job.
I think
It's just that I think that whatever he had to actually insert
he has to
in
say
terms of information
Yes.
really needs to be there,
Yes.
because it also shows that there was something incomplete about the source text. So and that's where the creativity comes in. That's where research plus creativity comes in, you know, because that text in per se did not exist
Absolutely.
before.
Absolutely. And I have an example from my academic translation course this semester. One of my students found that the source cited is wrong. It's another book, and it's there. So we have to fix that, okay? And we have to tell the author when he goes for the second edition of the book that he should fix that, because he's quoting the wrong text. He's citing the wrong text. So yes, and those things, and to me, the importance of that is that it shows how a translator reads. We read differently.
Yes.
The way we read, no one else reads, okay? And I always tell, how did you see, and people ask me, how did you see that? I said, because I read every word. I you know, this is at the most basic level. I read every word. And people read sentences, people read phrases, people, you know, the way that you read when you're not translating is totally different. And to create that awareness in translations that are in development, right, and in formation is very important. We should not read like everyone else reads. Okay, so
someone, and I have lost the I've lost the source, but someone before I became a student at UPR, but while I was writing a previous thesis about translating children's Bible curriculum, I came across this quotation that no one gives a text a closer reading than a translator.
Right. No one.
And
No
I
yeah.
need to find that quotation again.
Yeah.
Need to find my old thesis and see who
And
it
it's
was
not,
who wrote that.
And in this case, it's not even reading the words, but reading the words behind the words, because, you know, because you're going to actually the quotes, and you're going to the references, and you're seeing if those things match up with the information that's provided. So it's you know, it's a level of skullduggery, you know, that goes beyond reading every single word.
Yeah.
Well, even just what Yanniel did with the title of the book shows that he's reading for meaning, not just reading for the words, and he's not just translating the words. And
yeah, en El Quijote it says es el reverso del tapiz. We don't only look at the tapestry, we flip it and we see how it was knotted and knitted. And so, you know, that's what we do. And I love that. I love that we do that. And I like very much that this is reflected in your preface. I love the tone of your preface very much, very, very much. That's it, Yanniel. Congratulations. I mean, we haven't made you defend yourself very much because you did a great job. You did a wonderful job.
I have one comment that there needs to be another revision, and also I'll mention it here. And that's with the title of your thesis, because it makes it seem as if you translated the entire book.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I usually mention that, and I didn't.
You have to mention in the title of your thesis, chapter 4 of.
Yes.
Not just the whole book, because You did
Right,
not do the whole book.
We
Yeah.
often say an excerpt from, but since it's a specific,
Mhm.
self-contained,
yeah.
a
Yeah.
chapter, that works out beautifully. Just say
Yeah.
of chapter 4
Translation
of.
of chapter 4, yeah. Yeah, thank you, David.
Absolutely.
I guess we were
Something
so
that-
delighted with the reading.
Came up. It just came up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think maybe we're ready to escort Yanniel to the atrium.
Wait a minute.
Oh,
Do you
wait. I'm
want to add
sorry.
anything, Daniel? We took, I mean, we were, as you can see, we're very enthusiastic about this work. So we just were talking and talking. Is there something you would like to say or?
I had that very same observation that David just brought up, the whole not including the title of the book, as if as if I had completely translated the book. And I I honestly didn't know how to handle that problem per se. I didn't know how to word it on the preface, or how to explicitly say that I only translated this chapter. I wasn't sure if I should have just I'm not sure if it was a better option if I would just say, like, I translated chapter 4 and just the translation of chapter 4's title,
That's it.
or also include the title of the book and chapter 4 below.
What is the title of chapter 4? You gave it to us in the presentation.
Yeah, es las costas y los bienes marítimo terrestres as the coast and maritime terrestrial property.
Well, what you could do then is, for the title, change the title to change it to, a translation of, and then the title in quotation marks of that chapter, from, and then have the book by, then have the book title by Érika Fontánez Torres.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so the title of your thesis then would be the title of the chapter in English, a translation of chapter 4.
Yeah, so you need to change the
Of-
title. So
of-
that's
Of the,
And then the title of the book
yeah.
title of the book in Spanish by Érika Fontánez.
yeah, it makes the title page a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But it's more,
Yeah, I don't know, but
it's for informative reasons.
but-
It's
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah.
Anything else, Daniel?
I think that would be all.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so now I guess we can ask Barbara to escort Yanniel to the anteroom. I'd like to congratulate you on your excellent, excellent work, your very diligent work that included a lot of research, which is all documented in your preface. And your whole approach to this project has been commendable. So we would like to award you with the grade of sobresaliente con la recomendación de publicar. So, which you can't get any higher than that. So
That's top.
Yeah.
That's it.
So congratulations.
Congratulations.
It was a great pleasure, Yanniel, working with you, and I wish you the best. And if you ever need any references, please just ask.
Yes, thank you, Daniel.
Yes.
I feel so honored that you invited me to be part of your committee, and I have enjoyed it so much, and I loved our conversations. And as I was commenting my colleagues when we were behind doors, that the maturity with which you deal with suggestions or criticism, the way that you are able to balance different points of view, show me that you are so ready for this profession. And I can only see that you will be a wonderful translator, and that you would be a great professional, and people are going to look for you because you have not only the capacity and the ability to translate properly, but also you know how to deal with the different things that come up in translations, even disagreements, everything. You really, I am beside myself. I'm so happy, and I really thank you for inviting me.
I agree. Congratulations. You made our job easy.
Yes. Yes.
So, I don't know about David's job. I mean, I know he was there at every step, but and then it was a difficult text. But
oh, now I can get into that passion part, no, where I complain about everything. No, it was a great pleasure. Okay, so Barbara, without further ado, I think we can have our portrait taken.